Welcome, everybody, to Leadership Pathway, first Thursday webinar. We have a great, very special guest with us today. But before I introduce him, I want to make you aware of the people that helped put this on for us. And I'm going to put his link in the show notes and in the chat window there. And if you're live with us today, you're welcome to insert a question in the chat comment there right below where I put Norton Creative. Jonathan Norton helps us every month get the emails out and get the stuff spelled correctly, and anything on our site that looks good and is spelled correctly, it's done by Norton Creative. And the stuff that's misspelled and looks like it was designed by a fifth grader in the 90s is the stuff that I did. So he is fantastic. He's fast. He thinks like a church guy and really, really helps us out. So every month we do this webinar on the first Thursday, talking to people who are on the same topic that Leadership Pathway is on, which is how do we help the youngest enter the workforce? We're focused on church. How do we help them enter the workforce? How do we help their bosses understand them, really, is where we camp most days. And how do we coach and lead for success? And our guest today is no stranger to that. In fact, he's probably, we probably quote Tim Elmore more than we quote the Bible. So welcome, Tim. It's great that you're here. I'm so happy that you're here. Hold on. The well-worn book, Gen Z Unfiltered. If you're leading something and you're trying to hire 20 to 25-year-olds to work for you and you don't have a copy of this, at the very least, when this is done, run out and grab a copy or download it to your Kindle. Tim has been on this topic of generational gaps and how to lead for a few decades now. Some of his clients are things that will make us unhealthy, like Chick-fil-A, Jack in the Box, and Coke, but some good ones too, like the NFL and Home Depot.
That's right.
And now you can add Leadership Pathway webinar, of course, to that list. Tim, welcome. I've been looking forward to this. You're so gracious to give us some time. Welcome.
You bet. Thanks, Dave. It's gonna be a fun conversation we have.
Yes. Okay. So before we get into the topic, I always love to hear from people that we have on. Give us the Tim Elmore story. What were you doing ages 20 to 25, good and bad?
Oh, wow. Good and bad. Okay.
Don't leave the good stuff out.
It's wide open. Those years were vital to me. I was beginning my career like most others, 20 to 25. I had begun as a teacher. So I was finishing up my undergraduate work, but I'd already started my grad work. So I was teaching undergrads as a first-year grad assistant. But then I also went on staff at a church. And then by 23, I went on staff with John Maxwell. So Mr. Leadership Guru, right out of college, pretty much. Yes. I started with him. And back then, over 40 years ago, John really wasn't famous yet. He was famous in circles, but little circles. Right. So I really got time with him. I mean, he personally coached and mentored me and how to confront people and how to speak well and this, that, and the other. So I really cherished those years. Made a lot of mistakes. Once in a while, thought I might get let go. But they were great years overall. I felt like I was in a weight room working out. But you know what, Dave? I'll say one more thing. Being under John, while he is certainly not perfect, I feel like I didn't have to unlearn a lot of bad leadership that people usually accumulate in their 20s. Yeah. I really saw a strong leader lead strong. So it was great.
What was the closest you ever got that you'll tell us about of getting fired? Because I've got some stories from my 20s.
Yeah. Okay.
But I'm not going to tell them. You can.
I'm going to give you a Reader's Digest version because that's all I'm willing to share. Yeah. John put me in charge of a brand new outreach. And when I say outreach, it was a ministry targeted to people outside the church. Yeah. And it was a cool vibe. And we were early on. This was over 30 years ago. So this was kind of new of doing anything kind of, risky and gutsy. But it didn't go awful, but it didn't go as expected. Right. And I thought when John said, let's meet and talk about how it's going, that he was going to do something bad,
Yes. Yeah.
And he didn't. He said, let's find out what we're learning, and that's John's style. So with John, I saw one of my leadership paradoxes: high standards and yet gracious forgiveness, always bundled together.
I'll never forget the big book, 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership.
Yeah.
And as a cynical Gen Xer, to get that handed to me, that was a tough read to swallow that 21. I'm saying there's no way they're irrefutable. I'm going to refute them all.
Okay. That's so true.
Yeah.
Can I volley back on that, Dave? I'm sorry I'm interrupting you. I was leading college students at San Diego State University and in the college ministry of John. He came up with this, and I go, John, you can't say that. And he would get up in conferences and go, you know why they're 21? Because there's not 22 and there's not 20. There's 21.
Amazing.
And it was so modern rather than postmodern, his commentary. He's so black and white. And I'm going, oh my gosh. Yeah. So anyway, I love John. I learn from him every time I hear him speak, but I go, oh, John, you can't say that,
He had a Promise Keeper sermon, as I recall, up there weeping in a huge arena. Probably did it more than once, but I remember that video made the rounds.
Yes.
And so impactful to many. You wrote once, which I get your LinkedIn newsletter. I don't know how many different ways people watching this can get that, but it's a great read. And I don't know if is it monthly, weekly, or just whenever you feel like it. And when it comes out, it's good. It's good.
I love it.
Whoever's writing that, it's good. But you wrote once one of, there's like 7 things every 20-something ought to experience to get fired was one of them.
Yep. I do believe this. I think everybody ought to experience, not because it's good, but because it's good for us, like broccoli. I think we ought to have a bad boss. I think we ought to get fired. And here's why I say that. Anybody can manage a good boss, in terms of relationship and, we love each other, pat on the back. I think the relationship challenges come when we do not have a good boss. It teaches us, 1, how to navigate hard relationships, but 2, once we get a leadership role, we're a little bit better than the bad boss was because we learned what it feels like to be under that guy or gal. So I absolutely do. Yeah.
So until I hopped on your website, I didn't realize you'd written, is it 30 books?
40 now.
40,
but
40
who's counting? Who's counting? So
Habitudes. So this is just classic. I know 2 of them. Habitudes and Gen Z Unfiltered. Okay. What have your other writings been on? What have you centered on outside of those books?
Yeah. Well, I've always had a passion for the next generation, much like you, Dave.
All right.
But my most recent book, I decided to tackle all generations.
Okay.
So it's called A New Kind of Diversity.
Okay. I saw that. Yes.
And it's called Making the Different Generations on Your Team a Competitive Advantage. So it's a business book. People can tell where my heart is spiritually, but it's a business book for people trying to manage somebody Joe Biden's age as all the way down to Gen Z who's coming in right out of college. So that's been really, really fun. And I believe we need to get beyond just tolerating each other. I think sometimes that's what an Xer or a boomer thing. We just got to tolerate these kids. Just saying, no. Let's welcome the differences they bring and put it to use. So,
Tim, when I was 25, my boss was super old. He was a 35-year-old. 35. I was 25. I'm assuming you experienced similar.
Yep.
I thought he was so old, so wise. His kids were like 7 or something. And I was like, will our kids ever be that old?
Yeah.
But I still knew there was a generation gap between us at some level.
Yeah.
And now it's my peers in these roles.
Yeah.
And they're 55 and 65 trying to hire 22-year-olds, the disaster stories, right? Yeah. I don't fault any of them. We've all lived it, both sides of that conversation, right? We've just aged, and you mentioned it since you brought it up. From the presidential candidates, CEOs at top companies, and there's a slice of it I love. I listened to a podcast a couple weeks ago, super encouraging. Like your 70s should be your best decade, and I was like, oh, okay, I still got a couple decades to go, which was encouraging to me, but it really brings this issue that you've been leading the way and helping people like us on to the forefront, because now the 25-year-old walks in and their boss isn't 35. Yeah. Their boss is 55, older than me, 60s. Yeah. But this is cultural. So I know it's also happening in small business and big business.
Yeah.
And it's been 5 years since you wrote Gen Z Unfiltered, I think, if I recall.
Yeah, that's right.
You mentioned to me you had some new things, a handful of new things that you wanted to throw down. So give us number one. What are we learning?
Yeah. One of the reasons there is a struggle or a challenge between young and old at work, wherever they are, ministry or business or whatever, is the combination of two realities. The age of authority is going down. The age of maturity is going up.
Oh, that's so good.
So think about it, listeners. A Gen Zer comes in and you may not like their style or their communication, this or that, or the way they ghost you or whatever, but they're coming in with some intuition on the future. They know 1 out of 8 Gen Zers is monetizing social media. They're making money. Yeah. For half of those, it's full-time job on TikTok or whatever. So I don't know how to do that.
Right.
So the age of authority, they're coming in without a badge giving them authority, but with an intuition, insight, knowledge. And they sometimes come across a little cocky. They can, but we need to know they're coming in with that. At the same time, though, it's extra challenging because their emotional intelligence perhaps is lower than 3 or 4 generations ago when they started the job. It was more, they came in with humility. I remember starting my job. I was just happy to be there. Happy you hired me, man. Hope you keep me, Right. So it's a very, very different animal now. And I think we need to just recognize we're going to need to listen a little bit more than we used to listen to a young person. And we're going to need to coach a little bit more than we used to coach a young person. Yeah. So that's one.
That grid early in the book that we referenced a ton, and it was striking to me. I didn't, nobody realizes this stuff when they're going through it, but for a buster, we tolerated our bosses.
Yes.
I entered the workforce because that's what I thought everyone was supposed to do. That's what we did. But I looked at my boss and I thought, I will grit against this until they leave so I can move up and make a living.
Yeah.
And for Gen Z, the grid says they wonder, why do I even need a boss? And that's what you're hitting right there.
Yeah.
They're smarter than we were. They're better than we were.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways coming in.
Yeah. So I'm telling bosses, you've got to turn your frustration into fascination. And I know that's just a cliche, but it has so saved my butt so many times to say, when I meet with Cam or Andrew or whatever, 30, 40 years younger than me, I need to go in ready to be mentored and to mentor. So that's the reverse mentoring thing I talk about in New Kind of Diversity. Yeah. So you're right. You're absolutely right. It's just a new day, and it's not a sequential, you'll get better and better. In fact, here's what I think, Dave, this will be confounding. I think a Gen Zer goes, if you got a lot of experience, that may work against you. That's 20th century experience. I have most of my life or all of my life in the 21st century, not the 20th century. And we're going, oh my gosh, that's true. Yeah. So I see the past better. They see the future better.
So good. Okay. All right. Number one, age of authorities is going down. Maturity is going up. Number 2.
Yeah. The second one was something I didn't bring up in the book, but I surveyed representatives from all 5 generations that are working. And I discovered all 5 want 3 qualities from the other generations. In other words, the question I asked was to a Gen Zer, an Xer, a millennial, what do you want from other generations when they interact with you? Well, you can imagine I got a truckload of different responses, but 3 came up in all the generations. Number 1 was humility. They were basically saying, when you approach me, would you approach me with a teachable spirit that says, I realize I don't know it all, and I'm humbled enough to know maybe I might even pick up something here. That was number 1. Number 2 was respect. Every single generation, not surprisingly, says, approach me with respect. Now, what we tend to do when I say we, old, want to go, well, Sonny, you're going to have to earn my respect, buddy. You've only been on job 45 minutes. I've been on the job 45 years, Yeah,
right.
But they all want, now here's a key insight. This is a sub point that I want to give you at no extra charge. Okay. Right. Boomers interpret respect as compliance. We don't admit it, but it's compliance. They view respect as equity. I want equity. I'm meaning I don't want a big power gap between you, boss, and me. Now, you might say, well, there's going to be a gap, buddy. But I'm telling you, just knowing that helps you lead them better, doesn't it? I want to see equity. I want to see the door open and you're accessible to me. I want multiple check-ins every day. I mean, it blows my mind, but I'm telling you, if I understand my follower or my team member better, I'm going to be able to lead them better. So that would be one. The third item on that list of 3 that they wanted surprised me. Every generation said, would you approach me with curiosity? Isn't that powerful? In other words, even the old, even the young said, be curious about who I am. Be curious about what I might provide. Oh my gosh. Can you imagine a workplace or a ministry? Humble, respectful, curious. Oh my gosh. It'd be a game changer, I think.
Tim asked a question. What do you see unique challenges that you see in church leadership specifically? How best can these generalities become a competitive advantage in church leadership?
Oh, wow. Well, okay. So one simple thing comes to my mind. You might go, duh, I already thought of that, but forgive me. I think in the world of the church, it's so easy as we age to hold temporary things as sacred. You know, like back in the day, we used to joke about, man, they think color of the carpets, this gospel, or the organ and the other, the choir robes need to be purple or whatever. You know, that's happened forever and ever and ever. It still happens today. It's just new subjects or new, sacred things. You need to be careful, or we need to be careful, not holding things sacred that should not be held sacred. Mm-hmm. One of our habitudes is called the bit market. Real quick, let me tell this story because it's going to inform the way you do ministry. There was a brand new president of an electric drill company who took over, shook hands with all the managers. And at the end of the day, they wanted to have a meeting. And the people wanted to brag to their new president how great this drill company was. They sold 60% of the drill bits sold in America. And you know what those drill bits are, those little pieces of metal. Yeah. Well, when they get done with their speeches, the new president steps up to the podium and says, gentlemen, thank you for those speeches. They were wonderful. You're just forgetting one important thing. And after a pregnant pause, he said, there's no market for drill bits. The market is for holes. And the moment someone comes up with a better way to make a hole, drill bits are obsolete.
That's good.
Well, he's right. He's absolutely right. We start falling in love with the programs and the products and whatever else we're doing at the church that we forget, oh, no. That's a drill bit. They come and go. They come and go. Right. So we need to baptize outcomes and fruit. Isn't that what the Gospels talk about? Fruit, not the program we got. So that would be one big answer that I think we're going to get guilty of naturally as we age. Yeah. That's the way I did it back in 2001. And we need to say, no, Josh, I need you to come up with an idea, buddy, because you have more fluid intelligence right now than I do. Yeah.
You've worked in large and small companies and large and small churches. My sense is that this topic is really hard. If you've got fewer than 40 or 50 employees, you might have an HR professional, but you definitely don't have a developmental champion or somebody focused on this every day. Yeah. And that's what I see. I don't knock churches for struggling with this or knock them for being, they struggle with onboarding. Small companies, family-owned companies.
Yeah.
And 50 employees is a big church.
Yeah.
That's several thousand people. But my sense is when you don't have expertise to help you slow down enough to think about these things, you just run. You hire people that get stuff done. And 20 years later, you've got this gap problem. Yeah. That's what I hate. It's not that simple, right? And I know big companies struggle too, but it certainly seems harder.
Yeah, no doubt about it. And I know you're not fishing for an answer, but I tell you, even when I talk to staff at small churches or small organizations, I say, make sure you stop every week, push pause, and don't just work on business items, but grow the business or grow the ministry. So we do lunch and learn every single week. Yep. It's a time where we eat together, and food always helps fellowship, doesn't it? Yeah. But we have one of our team members step up and do a developmental session. And it may be personal growth or professional growth. So one of our gals did something on couponing 1 week. Just here's how to do coupons better. But
Man.
then we'll talk about, time management or the art of confrontation. But I'm telling you, we make sure we keep growing so we don't get stale. And it's saved us so many times along the way. Yeah.
You're self-described. What does it say? A procademic. That's nice. I like that. That's a good word. How do you balance? What percentage, if you just think of your team, the lunch and learn, what percentage is training, right? Which is books, fill in the blank, learning, and what percentage is coaching or these things that aren't taught, that are coached in?
Yeah.
How do you balance that?
Yeah. So I'm going to guesstimate. You're like in terms of time?
Yeah.
How much? Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say probably 2/3 is working in the business and 1/3 is working on. So it's growth and development. And that, I think that's true because we have made sure all of our department heads are working on developing their team members one-on-one. So half of the meeting is how's the programs going or the products or whatever. And then the other half is how you doing? Are you growing? Are you, how you doing on this or that? We just have a bias with that because we're called growing leaders. We want to practice what we preach.
Yeah.
But, that's been very, very helpful. And I'm telling you, when you give that much time, Dave, to growing the people, they stick around or they're more apt to stick around.
Right. Yeah. Tim, my sense is you hire awesome people. This is church world.
Yeah.
And your world too. You hire awesome people that can get stuff done. The human condition, if you have a 40-hour work week, is to cram 50 hours. If you have a 50-hour, I'm going to get 60. These awesome people, especially in their 20s, 30s, young 40, they want to achieve. Yeah. They interview well. They hit the ground. All the things we love, Yeah. So a staff of 15 and a church of 1,000, and these are exciting, growing places. They have young people in their 30s there, young families. And then you say, okay, we're gonna whatever they're calling it, internship or resident, we're gonna get serious about, we're aging here. This is our classic. This is a classic conversation we have with a classic client. We're aging. We used to all be 27 and now we're 40. The youngest person's and now you have to sit down. And now the tension between getting all of this stuff done, right? Yeah. The high achiever who can slow down enough. How do you do that how do you drive that in if you haven't been doing it since day one? If growing leaders, it's not growing leaders community church.
Yeah, right. Yeah.
It's reaching the world for Jesus. They're going to reach the world. And now we're going to hand them a resident. And now they got to what? They got to sit down.
Yeah.
And have a conversation.
Yeah.
And we're like, not in the car on the way to the airport. Don't FaceTime. You have to sit and slow. Yes. How do you do that? How do you make that change?
There's not an easy answer. There's not a silver bullet for this. You know that, Dave. But let me just throw out a couple of thoughts that might be helpful. I think it's a little bit like evangelism. So all churches say, oh yeah, we want to reach people of Christ. Absolutely. Do you really? Because we would change the way we do programming and ministry if we really cared more about the outsider than we do the insider. Right. And that's the natural ingrownness that happens in local churches. So the same thing happens with aging. I would say we need to reconfigure our priorities and say, not only are the outsider the priority, the next gen is the priority. Now, every board member is going to go, oh yeah, absolutely. But then you got to go, okay, let's write down our practices right now. List them on a whiteboard. Well, you're going to find probably that's not what we're really practicing now. By the way, can I tell you a really cool story that might be helpful?
Of course.
The pastor at Skyline Church before John Maxwell took over was an elderly man named Orville Butcher. He was a part of YFC forever, and then he started this church back in 1954. So that would have been 70 years ago. Wow. Well, when he started the church, he really focused on the young person and the outsider. So, I mean, they had gang members coming in from Lemon Grove into this church, smelled bad, smelled like pot, smelled like beer, wearing leather jackets and haircuts you can get hurt on, So, and they'd sit down in the pew. Well, the board members with Orville Butcher, with Pastor Butcher, sat down one time and said, we don't want our kids around these people coming in. We're not going to do this. Sure. And Orville Butcher was quiet for a moment as he's beginning to get tears in his eyes. But he said, remember at the beginning, we said this was going to be about the outsider, and this was going to be about the young. And if you're making me choose right now, I'm choosing them, not you.
Huh.
Only one board member left. The others said, you're right, you're right, you're right. And they grew and grew and grew. Now, I say that only because whatever the issue is, I don't know what the issue is where you are, listener, but we've got to say, this is what we said we're going to do. And I'm willing to lose somebody to gain the person we're trying to gain. Yeah.
The rubber hits the road on, these are great. These are our heroes we work for. I remind our team all the time. These are the people, church consultants like me, we're just the quitters. These people are still in it every week.
That's right.
So the rubber hits the road on things like, will we let this intern preach a less than good message on Thursday? Will we let her speak in front of a group and struggle? Will we take 3 hours to help her rewrite it, listen to her practice it?
Yeah.
Will we let her get up, sing and lead for the first time ever? A grad of a Christian university today, they've maybe done this twice for a grade.
Yeah.
And now they're in a middle school room with a couple hundred students. I mean, the fallout is far. It's not like 10 kids in a house. These are great church. So that's where it hits them. Will we slow down enough? You know?
My word of counsel to play off of what you just said, Dave, is this. When you have that young person try it out for the first time, whether it's piano or sermon or whatever, is to introduce them and say, we're so honored and proud to have young Jessica with us. Remember, gang or congregation, one of our goals is blah, blah, blah. So you're reminding them, oh, yeah, that's right. We're not getting the best speaker. We're getting the new speaker. Right. So I need to tell you another story.
Sure. Well, you started with John Maxwell. So, of course, you're going to tell us stories. This is John. I can tell. This is like, you're like young John coming through right now. This is good. I like it.
So before John Maxwell ever entered my life, when I was in high school, I made a very strong commitment to follow Christ. And Sean Mitchell was a guy that was working on our public high school campus doing Bible studies, and he took me under his wing. I liked him because of his passion, and I was willing to learn anything. So Sean started something called Friday Faith and Film. We rented out a neutral location where high schoolers would come in from wherever they were, Christian and non-Christian. We would show a great movie, a great film that had a great nugget in it. There was some moral or lesson or truth in the movie. And then Sean would get up and speak, and he was a dynamic speaker. So the movie's shown, everybody loves it. We're eating popcorn. Sean gets up and wraps it up with a 20-minute talk. Well, my job was to show up on Friday night, set up the chairs, hold his coat, and get him a water. That's my job. I could do that. Well, about 8 weeks into this Friday Faith and Film, Dave, he shows up and he says in a raspy voice, Tim, I don't think I'm going to be able to speak tonight. You're going to have to speak tonight. And I said, what are you talking about? I get your water. I hold your coat. I can't do this.
Yeah.
He goes, if you don't do it, who's going to do it?
Yeah.
And so he handed me his notes. It took him a while to talk me into it, but he handed me his notes. Yeah. And that night, that Friday night, with about 20 minutes or 30 minutes of lead time, I got up after the movie with knees knocking and sweat beating up on my brow, and I gave the talk. Sean reversed roles. He sat in the front row cheering me on. He gave me a big old bear hug afterwards and said, Tim, that was great. From now on, we're going to rotate. I'll be on 1 week. You'll be on the next. And thanks to Sean Mitchell, starting at 17 years old, I've been speaking on a regular basis.
How about that?
I love that. And that's exactly what we're talking about. Here's the moral of the story. 30 years later, Sean and I get together just to reminisce about the old times and Friday Faith and Film and just laugh. And when I brought up that first time I got up to speak, Sean could not give me eye contact. Yeah. It's like he's looking at the floor kind of, and I go, what's wrong? And he looked up at me and said, Tim, I got a confession to make. I didn't have laryngitis that night.
Yes.
Of course, I wanted to slap him.
That was that was going to be my question.
Yeah, that's
he was
right.
miraculously healed 30
That's
minutes
right.
later.
Yes, exactly. But see, here's what I love about Sean. His goal that night was not to get the best speaker in the room up. It would have been him had that been the goal. His goal was to make sure this young whippersnapper that seemed to have a little bit of a gift gets a chance to try out his sea legs.
Yeah.
And I am so thankful now at my age.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. But this is we've got to get away from, it's going to need to be perfect each time, to we're going to be developing people each time we meet.
Yeah.
So that's my bias.
So good. Okay. Number 1, age of authority is going down, maturity's up. Number 2, we all really want the same 3 things from each other: humility, respect, curiosity. Number 3
has to do with communication. Anybody that's managed or led somebody from a different generation, older or younger, knows, boy, our communication preferences are all different. So I think leaders need to learn to get that out on the table early and decide what the communication norms are, rather than squabble over it 7 months in going, kids today.
Yeah, I know.
We need to say, okay, what's the norm? Is it Slack? Is it text message? Is it face-to-face all the time? Do not have a digital. Well, that's not going to work. But boomers are going to be different than millennials and Gen Z. So I'll stop there, but we've got to get norms on the table. This is the communication norm. But that leads me into another one, if you don't mind me just going right into the next one.
We can have more than 3. John wouldn't.
Okay. Yeah, that's
John would have 3 and they all start with the same word.
That's right. Or they rhyme. Yes. Okay. So one of the things I talk about in the book, A New Kind of Diversity, is clearing up preferences, expectations, and demands. This is a huge issue. And if you haven't learned it already, you're going to learn it hard way or easy way.
Yeah.
So in that chapter, I talk about managing the hard conversations, giving feedback, etc. But here's what I would say. When you interview an intern or a job candidate, you need to find out very quickly when they say, I want this, or I prefer this, or whatever, find out, is it a preference? That's the softest of the 3. A preference is, I wish this were true here.
Right.
But if it doesn't happen, I'm still going to be fine. Expectations, Dave, are a little bit stronger. I expect this to happen.
Yeah.
And it's not the end of the world if it doesn't, but you need to have that conversation right now.
Right.
Because, now catch this, conflict expands based on the distance between expectations and reality. I'll say that again. Conflict expands based on the distance between what I expect and what I actually get. So a simple example is, if I tell my wife I'm going to be home at 7 for dinner and I get home at 7:10, no big deal. If I get home at 9:30, we have a little conversation.
Yeah.
And it's not because she couldn't live without me for 2.5 hours. It's because I created this. Leaders, you've got to make sure expectations are managed well. And then, of course, the last of the 3, demands. Sometimes you'll be in a job interview with a new candidate, and they're coming in strong, old and young, but for sure young. This is what I demand. This salary, this or this. And you want to question them politely. Is this really a demand? Because if it is, I probably should stop the interview right now and just pray for you to find another job, because it's not going to work. Better to find out now than a year in and you're all squabbling and resentful and gossiping and rumoring. And so I'll stop there.
No, it's great. When those things are not cleared up, it leads to comments like kids these days. Like
it's true.
What we hear every week, the people saying that are 33 years old.
Yeah.
They're not necessarily my age.
That's right. Yeah.
And they're the veteran, 10-year veteran leader, and they are struggling.
Yeah.
That this generation doesn't have to walk the same. They're walking a different path in some ways. And it's because of this issue. And the pastors, especially as pastoral leaders, we say things like, well, can't she just read the room? Can't he just read the room? And that's what I did. Nobody had to tell me 10 years ago not to wear a trucker hat backwards with my jeans ripped at the traditional service at 8 a.m. on Sundays. Can't he just read the room? Well, and that's what you're saying here. You have to clear up. Is that a preference?
Yeah.
Is it an expectation, or is it a demand?
That's right. Can I camp out on that read the room thing?
Yeah.
So read the room is a very, very common comment, and it's a very good one. But what I say to leaders that are over 40 or 45 years old, so that's not everybody listening, but a few of you,
Yeah.
I would say, if you and I hopped on a jet plane and flew to another country, let's say it's Vietnam. Yeah. I'm making this up as I go. Mm. When we got off that plane, we would be psyched up to work very hard to connect with people there, right? Yeah. Because we would know we're stepping off an airplane in a different culture with different customs, different language, different values. Bingo. Mm-hmm. If you're an Xer or a boomer, Gen Z, different customs, different language, different values. And the same work that you'll put in Vietnam, you need to put in that office or that fellowship hall or that sanctuary, just like it's a cross-cultural relationship. So this is paramount. Are you willing to do the work to build that bridge? So here's a read the room story. I have a friend who spoke in Japan, of all places, and just randomly, she was over there, a female, and she gave a talk. And at the end, she had a Japanese translator with her. And at the end, she said, any questions? And the audience was very quiet. Nobody said a thing. And so she goes, okay, thank you very much. It's been a joy to be with you. Bye-bye. And she walked off the platform. Well, her translator follows her off and says, why'd you walk off the platform? She goes, well, nobody said anything. He goes, oh, there were questions. She goes, nobody said anything. He said, follow me. Well, you know what he's about to do. He goes back out there and says, are there any questions? Yes, yes, yes. There were 7 questions, because in Japan, the cultural difference is they're not Americans that raise their hand and say, yeah, Bob, I got a question here. Right. Japanese are very polite. Eye contact. Yes. It's just eye contact. They just look up a little bit, and that's just their humble way. But you've got to know the culture. Bingo. If you're leading a Gen Zer, you better figure out who that Gen Zer is, because they're extremely valuable for the future, and more than you, maybe. Sorry. And we've got to read the room, and that means their room. So I'll stop there.
Well, in our work, in church work, it's mission critical.
Yeah.
If you can't keep them on your team, you will not have them in your church. And we've known that for 40 years, but now, I mean, there's a class of us that began the church change stuff in the 90s. John was right there at the Willow Creek Conference. All of that. That's where I grew up in ministry. And now we're on the other side of that curve.
Yeah, it's true. It's weird.
It's mission critical.
We were the emerging leaders at one point.
Yeah. Okay. You want to stop there? 4 things? Because I've got one final question.
Yeah. Let's stop there.
So the 4 things, who was it there? Alice said, can you repeat the 3 points? Yes, of course. We have to repeat them. Number 1, the age of authority is going down, but maturity is going up. The second thing was 3 things. We're all looking for the same 3 things from each other: humility, respect, curiosity. Boomers to Gen Zers. You got a communication preferences. Got to clear. And then number 4, we have to clear up what's a preference, what's an expectation, and what is a demand.
Yeah.
And conflict grows in that gap. I love it.
Yeah.
Okay. This is just classic church stuff, man. But about the time we get our hands on millennials, then it's like Gen Z. And now we got our hands on one of our coaches. It's like, make sure he give us a word about Alpha, who's coming. And I know you're writing and you're talking about this with your, dealing with education and teachers.
Yeah.
They're in middle school, entering high school or whatever.
Yeah.
Tell us what you see coming down way off on the distance there with Gen Alpha.
Well, some of it would be predictable, because you look around and you see the world that they're in. It's not just AI, it's robots and it's all. The average Alpha generation kid, when they're adults, will be interfacing with robots as much as humans. That is not an exaggeration. Wow. So get ready. It's the Jetsons, Now, here's some good news I want to give you all. Some of the research we're digging up on the Alpha generation is very, very exciting. Now, we need to manage the tablets and the devices, the portable devices. Right. And if you're not going to do that, they're going to have mental health issues. Not might, they will.
They will.
In fact, I highly recommend Jonathan Haidt's latest book, The Anxious Generation. He's got 4 big ideas, and you ought to just get that book. He's an NYU prof, but he's great. But here's what we're finding out about alphas that's going to encourage you today. As surveys are taken on multiple generations, including Gen Alpha, they're showing up in elementary school with greater levels of compassion than the previous 3 generations at their age. I'm going to say it again. Alpha gens are having deeper levels of compassion than the previous 3. That would be Gen Z, millennials, and Xers at their age. So, and I think my theory is they're exposed to so much so young, that they go, oh, the world's full of problems. So Lucy Blaylock in the 2nd grade wanted to learn to knit from her grandma. And so grandma taught her how to knit. I love that. By the way, I love generations crossing over there. So she learns how to knit. She was going to knit or sew. I think it was both knitting and sewing, but she sewed a blanket for a friend's birthday. She ended up sewing 2 blankets. So she asked her mom, can you get on social media and see if anybody in your fellowship needs a blanket? Because I got 2 of them. Well, her mom had several people. I think it was like 17 people that said, oh, I got a kid with cancer. We need a blanket. Or I got a kid here, blah, blah, blah. So instead of picking one, like Lucy said she would do, she made 16 more blankets.
Yeah. She's
now made hundreds of blankets and masks for COVID. I love alphas. I can do it, Now, not all, but this is a trending thing. And we need to capitalize on this in the church. These alphas are going to have a high sense of agency. I don't need your help. I can do this. Or maybe I do need your help, but I'm going to do this. Right. And you're tired and I'm not, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
So can I recommend 2 free things that might be helpful on this? Sure. Would that be okay? Okay. So not long ago, I published a free ebook that's on our site that you can get if you want, listeners, called An Early Introduction to the Alpha Generation. An Early Introduction to the Alpha Generation. So if you went to growingleaders.com, and there are tabs for resources, and there's a free button that's got, don't you love free, by the way? We have a whole bunch of free ebooks. That's one of them. That might just be some fun stuff to talk about in your leadership meetings. But then I've got one it's free. It's an early look at my new book on Gen Z called The Glass is Still Half Full.
Yes.
The Glass is Still Half Full. And if you follow me, you can see a thing that you can just upload your email address. In exchange for that email address, I'll send you this book. It's 50 pages of how to interview them well, how to onboard them well, how to lead them well. So TimElmore.com, you can go and find that pretty simple. But if that's helpful, if that's where you are, that might be a good ebook to have. So,
well, this is where we are, Tim. So thank you for all of that. I put TimElmore.com at the top of the chat. I'll put it in the show notes as well. Growing Leaders. I downloaded The Glass is Half Full. It's excellent. It's on my desktop. Finish up with this thing you've got, this idea you've got for next year that I signed up for.
Yeah.
The year-long thing. Tell us about that.
Okay. Thanks for asking. I'm really excited. I just talked to a Chick-fil-A owner-operator yesterday, and he said, can I send 2 people? Can I send 2 people? So the idea is pretty simple. It's a year-long journey together that we'll have virtually. Although, Dave, I'm thinking having the initial meeting at my house, just where we all get to know each other in person, have a meal together. But then it's a monthly virtual coaching meeting where we'll talk about these kinds of issues, how to onboard them well, how to lead them well, how to give feedback that's hard, those kinds of things for an entire year. So there is a cost to it. It's $5,000. It's $5,000 for the entire year. And then I want to have a end of the year gathering where we just have time together to do Q&A. But I'm calling it Helping the Next Gen Win.
Yes.
And how did you find out about this, Dave? Because maybe that's how they would find out about it.
I don't know, which I hate it when people tell me I don't know how I heard about it. But I don't know. It was in some feeds. It was on your feed or something. I don't know.
Yeah. I think you just put in a link that will help them, because I think on my website you can find this. Right. And folks, I don't want you to feel any pressure. Sometimes money is an issue, but I want you to see this as an investment if you can do it. Sure. Dave and I have already talked. This is going to be such a good conversation. solely on this topic, and based on the new book that I'm doing called The Future Begins with Z. So it should be pretty fun.
And if you work for a church and money's an issue, just go ask someone to pay it.
Yeah.
Because they don't need another boat or another house. Yeah, they need to invest in things like this that their church will still be alive in a decade. So money, we all work for somebody that owns the cattle on 1,000 hills.
That's right. That's
so
right.
Money should not be although my team, when I hang up, they will pound me for saying
yes, of course.
Anyway, man, this has been so good.
Good.
This is so good. I should say thank you for your life work.
Well,
because you don't probably know if we could graph who you've inspired and who you've changed and who you've made a way for. And people like us, we benefit greatly from your work and talk about your work and the principles and the things that you've taught us all. So please don't stop doing that.
Well,
because people will be like, oh, wait, you're not very smart. You've just been saying what Tim said.
Dave, I feel the same way about you. Thanks for the work you do. I loved getting to know you not long ago, and it's going to be a fun year together that we have. I'm sure we're going to laugh a lot and cry a lot, but it should be a good journey together. So,
all right. Thank you. Thanks for the time. Everybody, this will be on you'll get the email, but it'll be on the YouTube thing later, and just send it to all your friends because they need this. If they're working at a church and they're not on this topic, they are a decade behind. At least.
That's right.
All right. Appreciate you. Thanks. See you next time. Take care.